I think the biggest problem it creates for us is a false sense of security. The dollar is based on confidence, and having confidence in it because it's a less flawed instrument than its competitors, will cause us to be less vigilant in terms of taking care of ourselves or understanding the dollar and the deficit for what it is.
Welcome to Rethinking the Dollar. Today I'm excited to have my guest, Mr. Rick Rule, the President and CEO of Sprott U.S. Holdings Incorporated. Today, Mr. Rule sits down with us to share his thoughts on the economy as well as his thoughts on the dollar. So, Mr. Rule, thank you for joining us here on Rethinking the Dollar.
A pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to address your audience.
All right, well, I had to chop down an introduction there. Clearly, those that may not know you, you have a very extensive background in mining resources and all types of investing type of things. And so I'm interested in having your take on what's going on globally, being that you're an international figure for the most part. And so before I actually get started, I want to get into some Rethinking the Dollar questions. And the first question is, what comes to mind when Rick Rule hears the words Rethinking the Dollar?
Well, I think first of all, it's a wonderful topic to address. Many people who earn and spend and save dollars don't really understand what a dollar is. A dollar bill is, from my point of view, almost a floating abstraction. It represents a piece of faith in a society. If that faith is well placed, the currency works. If that faith is actively debased by elements of society or the people that the society have chosen to lead itself, then the faith is misplaced and the currency unit, which is really evidence of trust, begins to become valueless. So I think your premise, rethinking the dollar, is absolutely critical for people whose lives are denominated in dollars.
All right, well, I appreciate you giving that explanation there. Now, when it comes to rethinking the dollar, my goal is to basically reach out to millennials as well as anyone who will listen in regards to currencies and the purchasing power that they no longer retain. And so when it comes to monetary awareness and financial literacy, I like to basically just try to help people to open their eyes up to something new. And so, in your opinion, why is it important now, like never before, to really take interest in monetary matters as well as their own personal finances?
Boy, that's a great question. As you spend longer on Earth, some fallacies are easier to debunk. On my way to work this morning, I went past an establishment called Motel 6. Many of your peers know what Motel 6 is, but I bet most of them don't know that it's called Motel 6 because when I was your age, you got a room there for $6. Now, 30 years later, driving by Motel 6, the sign said Motel 6, $69.95. Now, there's only two ways that the price of a room at Motel 6 over 30 years could go from $6 to $69. Either the room is 11 times as nice, or the currency that we use to purchase a room at Motel 6 could have depreciated by more than 90%.
Wow.
So let's look at a room at Motel 6 in terms of gold, a different currency. When a room at Motel 6 was cheap, when it was $6, an ounce of gold could buy you 5 or 6 room nights at Motel 6. Now that Motel 6 is expensive, an ounce of gold can buy you 13 or 14 room nights at Motel 6. So charting the purchasing power of a dollar expressed by a room at Motel 6, and then charting the purchasing power of an ounce of gold measured by a room night at Motel 6 is the most graphic demonstration that an old man, me, can give to a young man, you.
Wow. Yeah, Motel 6. That I've heard that, but I've never knew that actually was $6 directly. So, wow, I wish it was still was $6. That'd be a lot cheaper to afford. But now, there's a lot of things going on globally in regards to cash and just the demonetizing of high denomination notes. And so we're basically experiencing some things we've never experienced before. So if Rick Rule was in front of a podium and asked to give a global state of the economy address, how would you address the audience and what would you tell the world about the current state of our global economy?
Well, a lot of things. I would tell people your age that people my age made each other a lot of promises that they're going to make you pay for. And I would suggest that people who are your age tell people my age that you didn't make us those promises and you don't have any particular interest in keeping them. I'm not advocating an intergenerational war. I'm just suggesting that the on-balance sheet and off-balance sheet liabilities are promises that were made by people where they sort of mortgaged your future for our benefit. And while from my point of view, that's a hell of a deal, I could understand how, from your point of view, that would be problematic. You know, fairly soon, the on-balance sheet liabilities of the U.S. government are going to exceed $20 trillion.
Yeah.
I'm an old man, and $1 trillion is an incomprehensible sum to me. And the consequence of it being incomprehensible is that people try not to comprehend it. The off-balance sheet liabilities, not figured by Rick Rule, not figured by some old crank, but rather figured by the Congressional Budget Office, exceed $100 trillion. Now, for your audience's appreciation, $1 trillion is 12 zeros. That's why it's so incomprehensible. And from my point of view, there's only two ways out of this dilemma. One would be default honestly. That is, tell the people who bought the government debt, too bad, so sad, we don't have the money, we can't pay. And to tell the people who are the beneficiaries of the off-balance sheet liabilities. By the way, you know what an off-balance sheet liability is?
Yes.
It's me.
Oh, yeah.
It's me. It's Medicaid, it's
Social
Medicare,
Security.
it's Social Security.
Right.
You know, when Social Security was put in place, and I understand it was well-intentioned, when it was put in place, the average life expectancy of an American male was 65 years. And so what Social Security promised to do was keep you alive, but in poverty, for every year after 65 you live. That was an easy promise to make because most folks didn't live past 65.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's to sustain the sort of lifestyle that gets a politician reelected, and the average life expectancy of an American male is 85 years. The truth is that promise is unsustainable. And we can either renege on that promise honestly, saying to people, yes, we understand it's a promise, but it's a promise we made that we can't keep. Or what's more likely is that we'll renege on the promise dishonestly by reducing the purchasing power of the obligation that we have promised, by debasing the currency.
Yeah.
And I think people your age need to understand that basic premise. The promises that we've made to each other in this society, irrespective of how you cut it up, right? Irrespective of it's young, old, black, white, right, left, Republican, Democrat, the promises that we've made to each other were a lie. They were dishonest. And until we go about righting that wrong, the only way out of this lie is a new lie, debasing the currency.
A new lie, debasing the currency. Yeah, and that seems like I often look at the graph or the chart of the dollar from 1913 to present, and you just see the downward spiral. And so my thought is, at what point will people actually look at that graph of seeing the devaluation of the dollar and an erosion of purchasing power and ask themselves, at what point will it touch zero? And what will it feel like when it gets to zero or goes below zero? So paint a little small picture for us briefly of when that tipping point of the scale going below zero for the dollar. What would that look like, feel like, or just paint a picture for us real quick?
I think we're starting to see it already.
Really?
The election that we just had It's amazing to me that 310 million of us stumped up those two to run the place. I think the reaction that we just had with some very large numbers of Americans opting, as an example, for Bernie Sanders, following a political school of thought, socialism, which has been a proven failure.
Right.
Another whole big group of Americans backing Hillary Clinton in a sort of a clientelist, capitalist regime. And then Trump, who was, from my point of view, at least publicly, the most objectionable candidate that I have experienced in 64 years on Earth. I think that the situation that you're describing already exists. I think that the electorate in the United States, unwilling to confront a $20 trillion on-balance sheet liability, has come to view the elections in the way H.L. Mencken did when he described them as advanced auctions of stolen property. People are looking at the common wealth, the private wealth that each of us generates individually, and trying to steal as much of it for their own group as they can, while depriving other groups of the ability to steal from them. The chaos that occurs as a consequence of this mammoth political lie is already manifest in groups of Americans identifying themselves in some way other than American and trying to pick apart the carcass for their own benefit while depriving other citizens of the ability to take their wealth. I think you're already seeing it now.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I never heard that perspective there as far as that we're currently in the midst of that tipping point for the dollar. Now, let's get into some questions now. As we draw towards the end of 2016, there's a lot of things happening this prior year. What are some things that has Rick Rule uneasy or perhaps excited for the end of this year, heading into next year? You know, not to paint like a doom and gloom type of picture, but you know, you're an international guy, so clearly you have your ears to the ground globally. What are some things that has you uneasy as well as probably even excited?
Well, I think one of the interesting things about the dollar this year is, despite the fact that it has so many problems, I think it'll do relatively well compared to other currencies. My good friend Doug Casey, who I hope you interview sometime,
I would love to.
described the dollar as the prettiest mare at the slaughterhouse. As much trouble as there is with that piece of paper, it would appear to be a better piece of paper than the yen, the renminbi, and the euro.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that'll surprise us is that over 2017, the dollar will probably do better than we think it will.
Right.
I'll leave that one there. And I don't want you to believe that I'm negative. I believe that the ascent of man is the longest unbroken bull market in history. And I'll give you a couple things that still make me feel hopeful. One is that you can get a invariably young group of pimply-faced college students that capture a garage in Palo Alto, California, and they make Facebook or Google. They make something that makes everybody's lives so much better that they generate billions of dollars in new economic activity. The truth is that American society, for all its faults, is still the most resilient and creative society on earth, and is still an aspirational society. And if we renounced, to some small degree, our belief in the collective depredation on individual wealth, this is a really salvageable society. And in that regard, there's good news too. There's a young people's libertarian organization springing up all over the place. When I was your age, I couldn't spell libertarian. And the whole group of us, as Murray Rothbard said, could have fit in his living room, and it was not a big living room. One group, Students for Liberty, has 160,000 students worldwide proselytizing for liberty. And it's not led by old morons like me. It's led by these kids themselves. So it's difficult for me, even in the age of Trump and Clinton, it's difficult for me to be overly pessimistic because of the incredible resilience of American popular culture and the increasing awareness of the nature of the difficulties that we face among young people, particularly relevant, given how completely unaware my generation was at your age.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, earlier on, you hinted at the idea that 2017 is going to be pretty much good for the Federal Reserve note or the dollar, being that all the other currencies around us won't be doing too well, more likely. Now, if the dollar continues to rise strength-wise, could that create some problems for us here, as well as the emerging markets that have to pay back some debt and stronger dollars, or could it be a problem as well?
I think the biggest problem it creates for us is a false sense of security. The dollar is based on confidence, and having confidence in it because it's a less flawed instrument than its competitors will cause us to be less vigilant in terms of taking care of ourselves or understanding the dollar and the deficit for what it is. The sooner that we deal as Americans, as humans, with the collective problems that we face, the sooner that we set the world on the right course. And so while I suggest that 2017 probably provides a psychological respite, I think that same respite is very dangerous on a going forward basis. We need to tackle this problem now.
Yeah, yeah. Now, talking about, currency, referring to the dollar, let's go to some global currencies with the Indian rupee, the removal of the 500 and $1,000 1,000 rupee note, and then Venezuela just recently removing the 100 Bolivar note within a week's notice, and in Australia talking about removing the $100. So all these countries are now starting to want to get rid of their highest denominations. Why is that, in your opinion? And could that be something down the line that we experience with the $100 bill here, perhaps?
I think it's vicious and pernicious. They suggest to you that what they're trying to do is get rid of smuggling, or they're trying to get rid of drug trafficking, or they're trying to get rid of all this kind of stuff. What they're trying to do is two things. They are trying to figure out a way that's much more efficient in terms of taxing you. They're trying to disarm you as a taxpayer. And they're trying to get all of your money put into a financial institution where they can continue to artificially drive down interest rates. Now, actually, what they're doing, at least in the less efficient countries worldwide, and by less efficient countries, I mean countries where they haven't mechanized theft as well as we have in the United States. In India, as an example, outlawing that currency, what they've done is they've driven tremendous demand into the gold and silver market, things that they can't demonetize. And they've increased corruption because you have to turn in your old currency to money changers or banks, which means that rent seeking, in other words, the acceptance of bribes amongst bankers and low-level government functionaries, has of course skyrocketed in India. Indians, we at Sprott have a lot of members of the Indian diaspora around the world as clients, and listening to their description of what's happening in India right now is actually sort of humorous. The cultural predisposition that Bengalis, Indians, Pakistanis, and Sri Lankans have to do with gold and silver is the fact that they're much more experienced than you and I with government. Their government goes much further back. And they understand their government to be an instrument of terror and repression. There's no mystery as to what government does for a living in India. It exists to steal. And the cultural predisposition among Indians for gold and silver is a reaction to 1,000 years experience with government.
Yeah.
And I actually think it's fairly healthy. When the Indian government put in place the very high excise taxes on gold, I talked to some Gujarati friends of mine. The Gujaratis are a merchant class in northwest India who regard themselves as traders, which means that the government of India regards them as smugglers. And I asked them about the excise tax on gold, and they said, well, we hope it goes forever. There's a 20% excise tax on gold, and it costs us 3% in bribes to land gold in India. So they built in a 17% margin for us. And my hope is that the ingenuity of mankind continues to defeat the best efforts of the thieves who are known to us as politicians.
All right. Now, talking about gold and in India. Now, I recently came across some alternative media things saying the gold was probably 2,500 ish or so an ounce there, but yet here I think it's just recently down to 1120 or something like that. So there's a big gap in the paper price. At what point will you think that begins to play itself out to becoming more realistic globally?
Boy, I wish I knew. that's the $64 trillion question. What you're really asking is, when does confidence erode enough in a society like the United States that real survival alternatives like gold and silver begin to replace dollars in terms of confidence? And I don't know the answer to that. I really, really, really wish I did, but I don't know the answer. I suspect that probably somebody like you, ultimately, as a journalist, would be better placed to understand that. Because I think the question revolves in some measure around popular culture. I'm I don't own a TV. As you can see, I don't actually know how to dress myself. So I'm pretty good at empirical stuff. But in terms of understanding confidence in popular culture, which is really what will ultimately drive alternative forms of currency, I don't have the answer, I'm afraid.
Right. Now, as we draw down towards the end of our conversation here, I want to get your thoughts on a couple more issues. And so, some people say that based upon this past couple months of data, that we're currently experiencing recessionary type of events already. In your thought is there, are we currently in a recession or heading into one possibly in 2017? And if that is the case, then how will I really impact some of the things we talked about before, in your opinion?
I don't see any real economic strength in the country, except in areas that are more tied into the new economy. Certainly where I live in San Diego County, we have a very vibrant economy as a consequence of life sciences and wireless. But I note that parts of the economy, let me rephrase that, most parts of the economy are relatively weak. Mm-hmm. The United States is certainly stronger than our trading partners, but I personally haven't lived through a time with this constrained an amount of global demand in my life. It seems like we have a synchronized slowdown. And it seems like any economic strength that we have is really a function of liquidity, that is quantitative easing. Mm-hmm. I think there's some confidence afoot in the United States that really has more to do with liquidity than solvency. Yeah. I think there's a lot of people that are afraid of deferred pension liabilities and the $20 trillion deficit, but there's enough cash in the system that people are allowing the fact that we are liquid to make up for the fact that we're insolvent. Mm. And the nervousness I have is that we're going to have to pay the piper with regards to solvency, and that we'll have a liquidity crisis like we had in 2008 that is born of the concern that people have of the political and social divisions that we have in the United States and our insolvency.
Yeah. Now, last two questions. Last one being the Federal Reserve note, or the dollar, being that this is rethinking the dollar, I'll keep going back to it just because I want to get as much as I can as far as your thoughts on and take on it. Let's look into the, of course, no one knows. It's all just, guessing and whatnot, but I'm interested in your take and your thoughts. Looking ahead, 2, 5, 10 years from now, the Federal Reserve note, being that it's the longest standing fiat currency to date that hasn't really went under completely as far as confidence, as you hinted at earlier. What would it look like in 2 to 5 years? Will we still be using it? Will it still be wanted internationally? I know that there's a big move to have alternatives as far as the SDR basket and things like that, and gold, however that plays into all this. What are your thoughts on the Federal Reserve note down the line?
I think that the U.S. Federal Reserve note will still be the world's reserve currency in 5 years. Mm-hmm. I think that there will be moves afoot to challenge it with a special drawing right that's a basket of currencies. Mm-hmm. I can certainly understand from the Chinese point of view as an example, that giving the United States government a monopoly on counterfeiting, a monopoly on seigniorage, is not something that they enjoy. In effect, they're subsidizing us. And so I can certainly understand why that would be problematic, but I think that while the dollar is certainly a lie, it's the most liquid lie in the world. And the consequence of that is that it will continue to enjoy prestige relative to other currency units.
Yeah.
I also believe, however, that if you store your wealth in dollars in deposit form, that you will continue to reduce your purchasing power year after year after year. You know, the CPI, stated rate of inflation, I think the last time I looked was 1.6%. The problem is that the people who shop for that basket of goods don't shop where you and I shop. Occasionally, when it's inconvenient, they don't add food and fuel. Well, that would be okay if I didn't eat, but have a look at me. I eat a lot. And interestingly, it also doesn't include tax. Now, I don't know about you, but tax is a big part of my cost of living.
Yeah.
My suspicion is that the purchasing power of my dollars is decreasing at about 4% compounded. And I think that that's going to continue for a while. I think the dollar will continue to be a medium of exchange around the world and in the US. And I think despite that, people who store their wealth in dollars will continue to be subjected to an unannounced tax.
Yeah. Yeah, I do agree. Now, last question here. Let's go back in time a little bit. You know, this is just a fun question that I want to ask. If you were to go back in time and give Rick Rule some advice and say in his mid-30s, early 30s, living in today's environment with everything's going on based upon what you've now experienced in your years here, what would you tell yourself? Basically speaking to the younger generation. How would you start over investing and getting into, you know, preserving your wealth and stuff like that? Give us some advice or some information.
You know, I was so lucky. Personally, I'd do again what I did the first time. I have never worked a day in my life. If you define work as something that's distasteful that you do to provide for yourself and your family, I am involved in a business that I believe is absolutely fascinating. I love getting up in the morning. I work hard all day. I stay late. For amusement, I give interviews like this, which ultimately increase my business. And if you are doing something that you love doing, you get so good at it. You demonstrate and deliver so much value for your customers that you can't help make money. It's very difficult for somebody to compete with me if he or she doesn't love what they do, because I'll work them in the ground. They'll be thinking about going to the park. They'll be thinking about going out to dinner. They'll be thinking about whatever they're thinking about. And I'm thinking about how to kick their ass in the market. And I'm having a good time doing it. So do what you're passionate about. If we're having an economic discussion, I'm not trying to say it's all about money, okay? But if we're having an economic discussion, you get rich by delivering utility to your customer, finding out something that you can do that can make somebody else's life better. And the aggregation of wealth over time is simply delivering more utility than you consume and investing the surplus intelligently. That's all it is. People put all these kind of fancy wrappers and discussions on it. It's nothing like that. It's figuring out something that you love to do that generates a product or a service that other people want or need, and producing more of it than you consume. It's really, really, really simple. So find something you love. Find something you can't help but do. Do it for the benefit of somebody else. When I stopped worrying about getting rich, when I started worrying about delivering utility for my customers, I became rich really quickly. But I didn't get rich when I was focused on making money. It was really, really, really odd.
Yeah. Wow. That's some great advice there. Focus on what you're passionate about, what you love. I appreciate you sitting down with us, Rick. I look forward to following what you have going on. I see you all around the web, so I definitely thank you for taking time to share information with with us. And, hopefully things do pan out very well for us in 2017, and hopefully have a chance to have you back on in 2017 down the line.
Best of the season. I look forward to round 2.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.